Havlicek steals it. Havlicek stole the ball. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier. United to Alici. Alici powers in. A
won their 6th NBA championship.
Gibson swings. This is going to be a home run. Unbelievable! I don't believe what I just saw.
Until Mark McGwire decisively broke his single-season home run record in 1998, Roger Maris's 61 had reigned supreme for 37 years, 3 years longer than Babe Ruth's tenure at the top. Yet, when compared to Ruth, and even McGwire, Maris seems to pale in our national memory. Not so much because he died too young of cancer, Ruth did the same, but because of the sheer sacrilege of his act. In one season, he broke into the palace and stole the king's crown. And for that, he would incur more anguish than joy, more abuse than glory. For Maris, the American dream of fame and success turned into a nightmare.
In the world of sports records, the number 60 probably represented the sexiest record in all professional sports.
There's one. It is going into right field, and it is gone. Number 55.
1961, Ruth was still God as far as home runs were concerned. I mean, 60 was this magic number that had been there forever.
In comes the pitch. There goes the drive deep into right field. It is going. It is gone into the bleachers. Number 56.
He was chasing this great icon, Babe Ruth, somebody that every kid, every adult in America identified with as the greatest sports figure and the greatest sort of social figure.
There's a drive to deep right, and there's number 57 off the top of the upper deck.
I remember one man in particular who was the father of a New York sports writer who idolized Babe Ruth. And every time I wrote a good story about Roger Maris, he would send me a letter telling me, how can you compare this man with Babe Ruth?
When you hit a ball here, you know it's going to be a home run the minute you hit it.
There's a drive. That might carry all the way. Bruton back. And it's number 58 for Roger Maris. His 58th home run of the year.
We had a walkway from the dugout into the clubhouse. There'd always be about 5 or 6 reporters there, and they'd always say, Roger, I need to talk to you. Roger, I need to talk to you.
You think that you can beat the Babe's record?
He had all of the pressure in the world on him because people just could not identify him as breaking Babe Ruth's record.
Among those unable to accept Maris as a legitimate challenger of Ruth was baseball commissioner Ford Frick.
He had been Babe Ruth's biographer. So suddenly in 1961, the first expansion season, Maris was proving to be way ahead of Ruth and looked like he was going to break the record. Frick decided that he would make a ruling.
He said he'll have to break it in 154 games if he's going to break the record. Dick Young, the New York Daily News columnist, was right there, and he said, well, you could always put an asterisk next to it if he did it in 162 games.
A lot of people thought that Frick went over the line in trying to protect Babe Ruth's record because of Frick's past association with Ruth.
People felt that it would be bad for baseball if Babe Ruth weren't the all-time hero. There was a certain religiosity about Babe Ruth.
Racing against Frick's deadline, Maris began to show signs of strain.
About the last week and a half or 2 weeks of the season, you could see it building in Roger himself.
The pressure was on him all the time, and Maris couldn't handle it. Maris just wanted to play ball and be left alone.
I think the pressure was simply enormous. Just to be able to go up to the plate and perform, knowing that you were doing something that was historic.
With all of its difficult psychological impact on Maris, he began to lose chunks of hair.
Holy cow, he'd lock her next to me. I'd say, hey, what do you got, ringworm? What? Is it catchy? No, I ain't got no ringworm, he said. It's nerves. I said, yeah? Yeah, I never seen anything like that for nerves.
On September 20th in Baltimore, the Yankees played their 154th game. Maris, needing 2 homers to tie Ruth, stood alone in the eye of a media maelstrom.
The pressure on Roger before the game, with everybody there and everybody talking only about can he hit 2 home runs today, was absolutely enormous.
In the clubhouse, we're walking almost on tiptoes. Nobody went near Roger. He just sat there. Nobody seemed to want to talk. It was an eerie, unnatural situation.
And he went to Ralph Houk and suggested it would be better if he didn't play that particular night.
Skip, he said, I just don't think I can get out there tonight. And I said, Roger, I understand. And I explained to him about going out to play outfield for 1 inning and come in, and I'd get him out there. But when he came in, he didn't say nothing to me. He went back out the next inning, so I didn't say anything more.
I imagine after all this is over, somebody may write a story or two about the month-long, day in, day out, excruciating pressure.
First time up, he hit a long fly ball to right field that was well hit, but clearly not going to be a home run, and it was caught. The next time up, he got under the pitch.
There's one. It is going. It is going. It is gone.
And the crowd was cheering for Roger.
One swing away from Babe Ruth and his own emotional deliverance, the man who would be king stepped into the batter's box in the 9th.
The Orioles brought in the relief pitcher, knuckleballer Hoyt Wilhelm, to face Maris in his final at-bat.
And Wilhelm threw a knuckleball. Roger tried to check his swing, and when that happened, you could see the air go out of him. There was this feeling of glad that it was over and disappointed that he didn't do it.
So he reached 154 decisions with 59 home runs, but as far as Frick was concerned, that race was now over.
3rd inning, 2 outs, nobody on. There it is. If it stays fair, there it is, number 60. How about that? There's standing ovation.
In the 158th game, Maris had pulled even with Ruth. Now he stood at the brink of history, uneasy, exhausted, and reluctant.
We came to the ballpark, and Roger Maris's name wasn't in the lineup, and we couldn't believe it. He still has a chance to break the record.
He had just asked Ralph Houk if he could have a day off, and I think everybody was shocked because he only had 4 days to break the record.
I remember wondering at the time, how can you do this? Because we were all pulling for him so much to break the record.
Maybe he was right in taking the day off, but I thought he was foolish.
On October 1st, some 23,000 of the faithful showed up at Yankee Stadium. And when Maris ran out to right field in the 1st inning, many gathered in the stands behind him, where so many of his homers had landed. The rest of America kept its distance.
There wasn't a whole lot of public attention paid to this.
The fans didn't care. The press was a little down about it. Fort Frick had destroyed the drama of the event.
The game didn't mean anything. There were the anti-Maris fans, the Ruth fans. They certainly weren't going to come out and see it.
Here's the windup. Fastball hit deep to right.
When he hit it, goose pimples came out on my arms. He just circled the bases, and other than the bat boy and the next batter. It was no different then than the first home run he hit. Came right into the dugout, didn't acknowledge the fans in any way. And we as a team had to actually push him out, and all he did was just take his cap off.
Another standing ovation for Roger Maris.
Here's a guy who broke one of the most hallowed records in all of baseball, and he had to be pushed to the top step of the dugout, and even then, he just waved his cap quickly from side to side and ducked back down.
It summarizes Maris, and it also summarizes that period in baseball. I mean, other players might acknowledge the fans' cheers, but he was not that self-centered. As long as his teammates appreciated it, that was enough for him.
When did the pressure start building up on you, Roger?
I don't think it was so much the pressure of playing the game of baseball, but answering the questions of the press day after day. You come out in the field, and all your time before the ball game is spent with the photographers, and after the ball game it's the writers, and before the game it's the writers.
He did it. It's one of the most amazing achievements in sports because he was temperamentally the man least suited to do this.
I
think that Roger wasn't cut out to be a home run king. He was not sophisticated as far as the media was concerned, and here he is suddenly in New York City, and everybody wants to interview him and talk to him. And I think it was a tough thing for a kid from a small town.
Roger Maris was born on September 10, 1934 in Hibbing, Minnesota. His family moved to North Dakota when he was 8, eventually settling in Fargo. With his older brother Rudy, he gained local fame as an athlete of rare promise.
They could do it all. They could hit the ball tremendously well. They could throw, great speed for base running, and very good fielders. They had the complete baseball package.
When Rudy was stricken with polio while in college, the family rested its hopes for athletic success on Roger.
Well, he ran track, he played basketball, he played football and baseball, so pretty much every season he was busy with that.
He was a star of the team, he was a star of the state, and probably the star of the whole area.
He had to choose at one point between football and baseball, and he was offered an athletic scholarship at Oklahoma, then run by Bud Wilkinson. And I said, when did you decide not to go to Oklahoma? He said, halfway through the entrance exam.
Roger told me once, you know, college just wasn't his cup of tea.
In 1953, the 18-year-old Maris signed with the Indians. 4 years later, he was called up to the majors. What should have been an exciting time turned sour.
He had a bruised heel, and it just wasn't healing, and of course that didn't show up in x-rays or anything, and so we had a hard time telling them that he couldn't run.
Things just didn't go the way that he had hoped they would. And then, of course, when they wanted to send him to play winter ball, that didn't go over at all.
Maris's refusal to play winter ball provoked Cleveland general manager Frank Lane to trade him to the Athletics. That June, Maris arrived in Kansas City with a dubious reputation.
Harry Kraft was the manager at Kansas City, and I'd played for Harry in the minor leagues. And he said, Bob, I'm going to have Roger room with you on this trip. And he said, find out what the hell makes him tick. Come about an hour later, here come Rod, and he's, what the hell are you doing? How come I'm room with you? And I said, Roger, I'm going to tell you the truth. The manager said he wants to find out what makes you tick. He said, I like guys that tell me the truth, and after that, we were great friends.
Over the next season and a half, Maris developed a big league power stroke, hitting 35 homers.
Roger Maris had probably the greatest swing for a home run hitter you could ever see.
I think Roger's swing was ideal for Yankee Stadium. 296 down the right field line. He was a dead pull hitter, but he had great bat contact. He didn't strike out that much.
Every time the Yankees needed something, they went to a ball club that was down in the standings and offered them 2 or 3 ball players for one of their premier players.
Kansas City was very much, in fact, a farm system for the Yankees. They would raise players there and trade them to the Yankees.
And I heard rumors on the bench that we might be getting Roger, so I'm on first base, and Roger got a base hit. I said, Roger, I think we're trying to get you. And I'll be darned, we got him in the trade.
They respected his great ability and the fact that he was a hitter who was made for Yankee Stadium. So I think they were willing to give up some minor league talent for him.
Leaving his pregnant wife Pat and their 3 kids in Kansas City, Maris landed in New York in 1960 with full powers of assertion.
Roger got off the plane from Kansas City wearing white buck shoes in January, and Big Julie Isaacson, a Union man who had made himself very close to the Yankees, said we don't wear white bucks in New York in the wintertime. And he took Roger to his hotel, which was somewhere in Midtown, and Roger immediately went out and bought another pair of white buck shoes. He was going to be Roger Maris no matter what.
Maris carved his initials on the Yankee tree by winning the 1960 MVP with 39 homers and 112 RBIs. By May of the next season, Maris and Mickey Mantle were launching the hottest home run contest in more than 3 decades.
The M&M boys. He's got 25, he's got 24, he's got 31, he's got 30. I'll never forget that summer because it gripped you from opening day on.
Both loved to hit, both loved to run, both loved to throw, and both loved to win. So, you know, that made it a terrific race.
By mid-July, the M&M boys had commandeered the headlines. In his 11th season in New York, Mantle was accustomed to the attention, but second-year man Maris bristled at it.
it was pretty much of a ritual. If the game was over, and you'd go to Mantle's locker and you'd go to Maris's locker and get their thoughts on how they performed that particular day.
I liked Roger because he told you what he felt. If he didn't want to answer questions, if he was unhappy, if he was feeling red-ass, to use the expression that was common in the day, he let you know. Mickey, on the other hand, would just say what he thought you expected him to say.
There's a photograph of Maris surrounded by reporters and microphones and everything else, and you're looking down at him, he's sort of looking up, and he looks trapped, like an animal that's caught and would like to get out of here.
He was never comfortable sitting around talking with the press as Babe Ruth was, as Mickey later became.
He was a loner. He liked to be by himself. He wasn't a party guy.
A lot of the reporters, you really had to butter up a little bit to him, and he just wasn't that type. You either took him straight forward, or that's the way it goes.
As Maris and Mantle crept closer to Ruth's record, many reporters stirred the pot by implying they didn't like each other. But in fact, the two sluggers shared an apartment with teammate Bob Cerv.
We really laughed when they were saying Mantle and Maris are feuding.
They were rivals in the sense they both wanted to do well, but they were team players, so it would be out of character for Mickey to resent Maris if he thought Maris could help the Yankees win.
I think they were competitive, they respected each other professionally, they admired what each one could do on the ball field, but I always felt they were not two guys who, if they didn't play baseball, would be best friends.
When Maris stood at 51 homers to Mantle's 48 at the end of August, support for the Mick built like a wave across the Bronx.
Fans have been led to believe if anyone is ever going to challenge Ruth's record, it'll be number 7. Well, along comes this fellow Maris, having played in Cleveland and Kansas City before that, and Maris suddenly is running neck and neck with Mickey.
When the fans had to choose, which of the M&M boys do you want to break the Babe's record, the fans overwhelmingly chose Mantle.
People actually, you know, weren't happy with Maris. Suddenly it was like, oh, he's a 260 hitter. They overlooked the fact he was maybe the best defensive right fielder in baseball.
I hated Maris. I loved Mantle. Mantle was absolutely seen as a demigod. Whatever Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods are now, I assure you, Mickey Mantle was that then.
If anybody broke the record, the fans wanted Mantle to break it. I think even some of the Yankees wanted Mantle to break it.
We were all cheering for Mickey to break the record more than Roger. Mickey had the reputation of power and home runs. Roger didn't have the reputation when he was with Kansas City or Cleveland.
In the second week of September, the home run race took a dramatic turn when an infection in Mantle's hip forced him to drop out. Although he returned briefly to finish with 54 homers, Maris now had to go the last mile on his own.
Roger in '61, you had to write about him every day. I mean, that was what was going on. The Yankees were in a very tough pennant race that year, which seems to be forgotten in history. Whitey Ford was having a great season. The rest of the Yankee team was having a great seasons. But it was Roger that people cared about.
What about the way you hold the bat? Have you been holding it the same way all your baseball career?
Somebody said to him on a curve he'd hit for a home run, thrown by a right-handed pitcher, should have that ball break in on you. I said, well, since he was a right-handed pitcher throwing a curve, I would say the answer is yes.
This one young writer from some out-of-town paper said to him, would you rather hit 300 or break Babe Ruth's record? And the kid said to him, well, I'd rather hit 300. He said, well, that's what you want to do. He said, I'd rather hit more home runs. And some people regard it as a surly answer, but he was being honest with him.
Somebody said, do you play around on the road? And Maris said, I'm a married man. And the reporter said, well, I'm a married man, and I play around on the road. And Maris looked at him, cold look, and he said, well, that's your business.
60, 70, 80 people asking the same stupid question day after day. Are you going to hit a home run tomorrow? Please, it's not that easy.
Baseball at that point didn't know how to ration access to the press and protect its players.
Bob Fisher was the Yankees publicity man, and after the thing was all over, he regretted that he did not protect, use the word protect, Maris more.
The relentless drop-by-drop water torture of daily coverage was made even more invasive by a new direction being taken by many of the younger reporters.
Suddenly, in the early 1960s, the television camera was really in the player's face, and people got to know the players rather intimately through their television set.
Television resulted in reporters looking for more angles. Reporters were not satisfied to just write a game story.
1960-61 was a transition time in newspaper business in New York from the older established writers who essentially worshipped at the shrine of the Yankees, and the younger writers were identified as chipmunks because we looked for other kinds of stuff.
The Chipmunks were a sort of social surfacing in sports writing of a new, more iconoclastic generation. They were young, irreverent sports writers.
The box score was not what we were looking for. We wanted some kind of insight into who people were and why they did what they did.
I always felt I could get into the player's life, his family, his head, his motivation, and get to know him.
Caught between the warring forces of old and new, Maris struggled emotionally in the eye of history.
Reporters from all over the country, reporters from Japan, reporters from Australia, reporters from England, gathered.
The afternoon papers, who would tend to leave details to morning paper stories, they were looking for afternoon angles, and the angle every day was Roger Maris.
Maris was a private man who hated being the center of a circus, but did not have the choice of telling everybody to back off.
Under the daily media assault, Maris grew from impatient to rebellious. On September 15th in Detroit, he refused to meet with reporters.
Roger's brother Rudy came to visit, and after the game, it was our responsibility to talk to Roger, as we had to every day, whether he hit a home run or struck out 3 times.
In those days, we could protect the players by letting them go into the training room.
And Roger secluded himself with his brother in the trainer's room that was off limits to the press.
But in Detroit, because the trainer's room was right in the middle of the main clubhouse, we attempted to talk to him, and he refused to talk to us. So we went over to Ralph Houck and asked him to intercede.
He wasn't going to try and force Roger out. He knew that Roger had cooperated every other day.
So Ralph got upset with us, and he hit the ceiling and said, "What do you mean to tell me the guy can't have time with his brother? His brother came to visit him. Leave him alone. You guys are bothering him too much."
Roger didn't understand what he should have done. His brother was going to be there all night. He should have dealt with the obligation.
They'd have waited a little bit, but then those kind of things happened in baseball, and they made a big deal out of it.
After hitting his 57th home run the next night, Maris projected an icy attitude.
Maris hit a home run into the upper deck in Tiger Stadium. The ball bounced off the upper deck back onto the field. Al Kaline, the right fielder for Detroit, made a point of retrieving the ball and tossing it to the Yankee dugout.
When he was asked by a Detroit writer if this was a gracious gesture, Roger said anyone would have done that. And it was taken to be a knock at Kaline. No big deal, anyone would have done it.
As I was listening, I was saying to myself, Roger, say that it was a nice thing to do, but that was Roger.
When Maris finally broke Ruth's record, many of his detractors gave more credit to circumstance than skill.
1961 was the first year that they had broken from 16 teams that had stood since the beginning of the century.
The schedule itself was expanded from 154 games to 162. In addition, the number of pitching jobs was expanded.
Expansion brought into the league 2 new parks, which were both great home run parks.
The 2 new ballparks, the one in Minnesota and the one in Los Angeles, were both fairly good hitters' ballparks. However, Maris hit only 3 home runs combined in those 2 parks. For the most part, Maris hit home runs off pitchers who had been in the league before. Maris benefited, without a doubt, by having the most feared hitter in baseball hit behind him, Mickey Mantle. He hit 54 of his home runs with Mantle behind him.
Even after the 1961 season, Maris could not escape the shadow of Babe Ruth.
The following winter, when the Elias Little Red Book of Baseball, which was the official record book, came out, there was no asterisk. They had 2 lines on the most home runs in one season. 154 games, Babe Ruth. 162 games, Roger Maris.
Although the debate would linger for decades, Maris received some measure of acceptance in the moneyed halls of Madison Avenue and Hollywood.
A new Major League record, 61 home runs by Roger Maris.
Hi, kids. That sure was a day for me. Part of the thrill of baseball. The kind of real excitement I've put into my great new game by Pressman, Action Baseball.
It's all in a day's work for the New York Yankee home run twins, starring in their exciting new movie, Safe at Home.
He wanted to succeed and he wanted to hit home runs. That's what he did, but not for the reasons of, wow, if I break this record, I'm going to be as big as Babe Ruth and I'm going to make millions of dollars. I don't believe Roger had a thought like that at all.
In spring training of 1962, when luster was already beginning to fade from his momentous deed, Maris faced another, more entrenched army of detractors, and the war escalated.
Len Schechter, who covered the Yankees at the Post, wrote a quickie biography of Maris, for which he got the munificent sum of $1,000. And Maris was angered. He thought that Schechter had made a fortune off him. So he came in angry.
The old-timers, and I believe led by Rogers Hornsby, were harping on this idea that Roger Maris isn't worthy of breaking Babe Ruth's record.
And Rogers Hornsby said something about Roger Maris being a busher because he only hit 260, you know, even though he had all those home runs.
The Mets were playing the Yankees in that spring training, and some enterprising photographer wanted to get a picture of the two of them posing together.
Maris refused, and that set off another firestorm. Who was he to refuse to have his picture taken with this Hall of Famer? Roger was a charming churl. He was no caterer to the stars of the newspaper industry, and New York had plenty of them.
Jimmy Cannon and Oscar Fraley were older sports writers. They had covered Babe Ruth. They had been around in the old days.
These guys were sitting in the dugout waiting for him, and Roger was in no hurry to go over there. He made them wait, and you didn't do that to Jimmy Cannon and Oscar Fraley.
Their egos were damaged, and they wrote some very, very cruel things about how the record didn't mean anything, and the negative publicity really became overwhelming.
Under such unfriendly scrutiny, Maris made a tactical error that cost him what little respect he still had among the press.
He was fooling with a kid, and the kid came up to him at a banquet and said, "Mr. Maris, can I have your autograph?"
And Roger said, "Watch this," and he winked at Mantle. And instead of signing his name, he put an X on the ball. Well, the little kid didn't bother to stop and look at the ball. He grabbed it after Maris put the X on it and ran out. He said, "Oh, can you imagine, the kid didn't notice that I wrote an X." His father made a big thing about it. Can you imagine this guy doing this to a little kid? And writers heard about that across the country and began to write about how big-headed he became. And that really turned Maris against the press more than any other single thing. He decided that he wasn't going to talk to the press that spring.
Maris never again hit more than 33 homers in a season, but he helped the Yankees win 3 more pennants in the 1962 World Series.
The Yankees took a 1-0 lead into the bottom of the 9th inning of the 7th game of the 1962 World Series. With a man on first and 2 men out, Willie Mays rockets a line drive into the right field corner at Candlestick Park.
Roger cut the ball off that Mays hit and made that perfect relay throw to Bobby Richardson.
And Whitey Lockman, third base coach, held a little at third base.
Willie McCovey lined out for the final out, the next batter, and the Yankees won the World Series.
In 1965, a mysterious injury to his hand led to still another extended bout of distrust.
It didn't heal, and they did X-ray after X-ray and couldn't find anything wrong, and there was a lot of suspicion that Roger was malingering.
He was injured, and they didn't believe that he was injured. They put out stories he was faking his injury.
And there were some in the organization that felt he was jaking a little bit, jaking to the extent that he wasn't injured but didn't want to play as much.
He had been sent to the hospital, everything had been x-rayed and everything, and there was never any, to my knowledge, a thing there that was broken.
They just kept saying, "Oh, you'll be all right. You just bruised a little bit."
He could never straighten his fingers out. They had lost all the muscle.
They didn't take very good care of us in those days, you know. When we were injured, we had to go out and play anyway. They didn't have a big investment in us. We were like farm animals compared to today's players who are treated like thoroughbreds.
Finally, at the end of the season, they said, "Well, we got to level with you here. You've got some broken bones in your hand."
It was a mystery to me when it came out that he had a broken bone.
Subsequently, it was found out that the hand was damaged, but by that time, the crowds had really turned on Maris.
By the end of the 1966 season, a media-battered Maris was on his last New York legs.
I stayed with Roger the last month of the season and really felt sorry for him because he really had lost a lot of the desire that he had to excel in New York.
Told the Yankees he was retiring, and then they went ahead and traded him to St. Louis. And we didn't have a clue about that. And we came home, reporters were standing on the doorstep. So then he didn't know what to do because he said, well, if I quit now, they're going to think, well, I didn't want to go there or play ball. I was just having a problem with the Yankees, so he decided he'd go ahead and play for 1 year.
So he was bitter when he left because he felt that they mistrusted him and disbelieved him.
When you go back through the baseball encyclopedia and say, Roger Maris broke Babe Ruth's record, he was traded for Charlie Smith, who was that? And it was almost an abandonment.
One Coors Light coming up. Here you go.
Thanks, Bob. Sweet setup. Yeah, ever since I got this Coors Light home draft, it's like having...
I'd heard all the problems he'd had in New York with the media up there, so I think many of us on the club were a little leery of him when the trade was announced, that he might be a bit of a prima donna. But we found out as soon as he joined the ball club, we were dead wrong.
Maris was not the ball player that he had been during his glory days with the Yankees, but Maris was a team leader, and he still gave you 100% performance on the field.
Raj loved it. He loved it here. It was the best thing that ever happened to him. Midwest, laid-back atmosphere. Just go out and play hard and show the people that you want to play hard and try to win, and they'll back you. And he did that, and they did.
And I think he enjoyed the fact that family was closer. We could get there part of the time. Where in New York, we didn't see him very much at all.
Of course, they didn't have the press like you had in New York, and it was just a whole different, outlook on life there.
He was away from the intensity of New York, away from the wire service pressure, and he didn't play every day, but he contributed quite a lot to the team.
You watch him go out in his day-to-day routine, playing hard, taking guys out at second base, diving, trying to catch balls. You look at that and you say, hey, the home run king does it like that. Let's go, fellas. Nobody can shake it around here.
Although he hit only 9 homers, Maris played his new supportive role to perfection as the Cardinals won the 1967 pennant with the best record in baseball.
He won the World Series, and he was going to retire. And August Bush Jr. said, well, if you play another year, I'll see that you get a distributorship. And so Roger agreed to stay another year.
I think it was one hand washing the other. Roger went there, played hard, helped them win, and the payoff was Gussie Bush, the owner of the Cardinals, gave him a beer franchise in Gainesville, Florida, which set him up financially for the rest of his life.
After helping the Cardinals to yet another pennant, Maris retired at 34 with 275 homers and a lot of residual resentment toward the Yankees.
He was a little bitter until they changed the front office, because he never went back to any functions there at all until Mr. Steinbrenner came in.
He wasn't too happy the way things ended up in New York his last few years, and I think that's why he stayed away.
Eventually, Steinbrenner convinced Maris to make his appearance, to soften and come back to Yankee Stadium.
One year we were putting in a baseball park at the local high school, and Roger said, well, I'll come if you'll donate some money for a baseball field here. And now it's a beautiful field in Gainesville, and it's called Roger Maris Field.
On opening day 1978, Maris flew unannounced into New York, where he was reunited with his old roommate. 6 seasons later, he joined the inner circle of Yankee history.
This is a big highlight for me. I am very proud, very happy.
I think Roger was probably very nervous that day. I think probably more so than I've ever seen him making his acceptance speech. I think it was very hard for him.
I think he was very proud of having his number retired. It acknowledged him not for this one feat, but for the fact that he was, as George Steinbrenner likes to say, a true Yankee.
All these people just cheering happily, and my dad looking so proud. And I was real proud of him, too.
He walked away at that time saying, wonderful. This is what it should have been like. This is what I was waiting for.
I got up and walked up to the top of Yankee Stadium, and there was an elderly appearing gentleman that was, I assumed, acting as an usher. And he says, where are you from? And I said, Fargo. Oh, what are you here for? I said, well, they're honoring Roger Maris, who's one of our boys, this afternoon. He just shook his head. That nobody should have broken the Babe's record.
I remember January of 1961. Roger had been named the American League's most valuable player on the banquet circuit, Jamestown, New York. A blizzard. There's always a blizzard there. And Mr. Fugazi, who was here, had chartered a plane to take us back. We were all tremulous, fearful about the blizzard, except for one. Roger Maris sat carefully next to the pilot and explained, "I'm sitting next to the pilot so I can study his every move, and if anything happens to him, I will land the plane." That was Roger Maris.
When SportsCentury returns, after almost 4 decades of punishment for one of the most heroic seasons ever played, Maris is given credit on the day when a new home run record is set.
As we say goodbye for this Saturday, we would like to note again the passing of Roger Maris after a long battle with cancer. Roger died today at the age of 51.
He was diagnosed in '83. He had bad headaches and bad neck pain for quite a while. The lymph glands were like a horse collar around his neck.
When I heard he was dying, I had a son in Albany, Georgia, and we drove down there, and I looked at the map, and I said, "Hey, Gainesville's not very far." He was in remission at that time. We talked for 5 days and never slept.
Our house overlooked the golf course, and it overlooked hole number 7, and he would look out and just see a bunch of his buddies playing golf, and, you know, it was sad because he knew he couldn't be out there with them.
We just learned to cherish the moments we had with him that much more.
And I was in the house with Mickey, and he said, "I got to call him." And he got on the phone and talked to Roger, and after about 5 minutes, Mickey hung up the phone, and he sat at the table, and he couldn't talk. He said, "You know, Roger's not going to make it."
And I remember walking into the hospital room and seeing him, and I was just like stunned. I couldn't believe it. It was just like wilted away, and he's just like, wow. And you knew that was the end.
Maris died on December 14th, 1985. He was laid to rest in Fargo, North Dakota.
It was amazing, the people that were there. They were just overflowing.
Boy, all those guys being there that he played with, it was an emotional time. I mean, I've never seen so many grown men crying in my life.
Mantle, being one of the pallbearers, was weeping like a child, saying, "There's no fairness in this, there's no justice in it. Roger was a good family man. I should have been the one to go."
It was so sad because he died so young and so tragic, especially since he had reached a level of financial security and serenity in his life that he was always searching for.
You know, you don't know what that might have done to his health, too. And those, you know, all that pressure that year.
I guess what I think about is Roger as a person, one that was perhaps misunderstood by the outside world. But to those who knew him best, it was obvious that his dedication was to his family and to his inner circle of friends.
It was very cold.
And somebody said to me, "Isn't it funny, all these reporters are here and they're standing out by the graveside just freezing." And they said, "Roger's probably just laughing at them."
When the evening was over and the services were over, you had a real sense of how much respect he had from his teammates. And the essence of any athlete, I've always believed, is not what the press thinks about him, but what the teammates and fellow players think about him.
4 days later in New York City, 3,000 mourners crammed into St. Patrick's Cathedral to say goodbye and perhaps apologize to Roger Maris.
People from all walks of life, from the very, very great to the, you know, very small, so it was really very, very special.
Church was standing room only. There were people down the steps outside, down the street. It was incredible to think that that many people felt something for my father.
In 1991, Maris was accorded free and clear title to the single-season home run record.
What Ford Frick decided was that there ought to be 2 entries into the record book for most homers in a season. One entry for 154 games, Babe Ruth, and the other one for Maris at 162. Somebody had written a column saying that if Fay Vincent had a brain, he would fix this mistake. We got together the committee that deals with statistics. We told them that we were going to redo that record entry, and they thought that was fine, and we did it.
I thought that was a great coup, because we rectified something that I felt was unfair.
So, 30 years after he broke the record, he broke the record.
In 1998, the Maris mark of 61 homers was eclipsed twice by Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa.
It was much more of a feel-good moment for baseball than when Maris and Mantle were doing it. I think the media were more friendly to McGwire than they had been to Maris.
He was controlled very well by the public relations people around the Cardinals and around the press. I think that was a tremendous factor.
Jumps into the seat to put hugs on the Maris kid.
McGwire knew to be very gracious to the Maris family, to try to include them in this record accomplishment. Roger was getting recognition that he hadn't had for a long time.
For him to take time out of his glory and all his success to acknowledge my father and to come into the stands and acknowledge us, I mean, that was incredible.
Today when I met with the Hall of Fame, they pulled out Roger's bat and I touched it. I touched it with my heart. Now I can honestly say that my bat will lie next to his, and I'm damn proud of it.
I felt like Mark McGwire encompassed the Maris family in such a way that it highlighted Roger's career.
The Maris family was able to ride the crest of the emotion of baseball fans that, to a large part, they were denied back in 1961.
No longer ranked in the top 5 on the all-time single-season home run list, Maris is not likely to be remembered for his fine all-around game. He remains, now and forever, as the man who caught the ghost of the Babe.
It fell to Roger Maris to break the sexiest record in professional sports. That will always be the #1 line on Maris's baseball epitaph.
It appears that Roger Maris is not going to make it to the Hall of Fame, but there are many people in the Hall of Fame who have not had nearly the impact on baseball history.
Besides the home runs, besides the RBIs, besides the MVP awards, he was a fine defensive player, and by all accounts of players on both the Yankees team and the Cardinals team, an excellent teammate.
He was an exceptionally honest, dignified, courageous man who, with a different, warmer, more talkative personality, might have become a really loved American hero.
Roger Maris was not only caught in a clash of American icons, he also felt the squeeze of competing cultures. An Oscar-winning film by 2 New Yorkers made his hometown of Fargo, North Dakota famous by lampooning its old-fashioned ways. But those same ways gave Maris the quiet character we so deeply admire, yet so seldom reward. When a truck driver offered him the historic 61st home run ball, Roger insisted he keep it. For SportsCentury, I'm Chris Fowler.